It's Mindy with Sunny Studio Stamps here to share our fall and winter 2020 release. Up first, we have our classic Sunburst and Sleek Stripe new pattern papers that coordinate with our previously released Polka Dot Parade, Stripe Silly, and Classic Gingham papers. Each one comes with 24 sheets of 12 two double-sided unique prints and 2 of each. And so you can compare our previous Classic Gingham with our new grid that's found in our Classic Sunburst here. And they're just going through all the colors here. Now I will say that the colors look much brighter here on my screen than they do in real life. They're a little crazy, like highlighter color, and they're just our typical colors if you've bought from us before. I was having to film this closer to, you know, it getting dark outside, and I think my bright lights were making them a little crazy. With this collection, we have some black pattern paper that we haven't had before. I'm very excited. We already had some subtle gray tones with the whites, so I decided to add the blacks. So here it is, the Classic Gingham. I'm sorry, Classic Sunburst. And here's our Sleek Stripes. So there's a wide and straight and diagonal stripe, excuse me, for each of those. And then, they're called Sleek Stripes. And right here, before I forget, I wanted to show how they looked next to our littler stripes. You can see for comparison's sake here. So that's the previous Stripe Silly, and then the new Sleek Stripes on the right. Just a little wider gives you another option. I elected to do 2 more basic sets rather than a Christmas set because I wanted something that I could use all year round as our space becomes more and more limited. So up next is a brand new stamp set called Scaredy Cat. It's a little 2x3 clear set with a kitty and a pumpkin and a moon and a couple stars and the sentiment Happy Halloween. And up first, I created a little tiny card using our new Slimline Scallop frame dies. You can score it in half, and just for comparison's sake, that's an A2 size card, and that's how big a little card would be. It's the great size to tie on to Halloween treats. And for this card, I used those moons and stars and a trim from our Slimline border dies, and I inked up my sky there with some Salty Ocean Distress ink. And for this last card with our new Scaredy Cat stamps, I paired it with our Sunny Sentiments grass border die there, the straight one, and then our new curved Slimline nature border dies to mimic the grass. And then there's also the clouds and the little Just Because bumblebees and a sentiment from our harvest mice. And up next, we have some Bountiful autumn stamps. It's a little 4x6 set that's all celebrating Thanksgiving. It has the cornucopia there with pumpkins and vegetables, a little carrot, a Thanksgiving sentiment, a hat, pumpkins. So here's an example using it. Created 3 little vignettes using, and then pattern paper from our colorful autumn with borders from our what is that? Basic border dies and a sentiment banner from the set. Has these 2 cute little banners that have 2 unique little sentiments in them, so you can personalize your card. And then for this card, I used our fancy frame oval dies and the stitched oval dies behind them. And then for my paper, I used our colorful autumn paper, and I heat embossed our sentiment there from the set. My last card here, I use the Slimline Scallop frame dies and a sentiment from our Elegant Leaves right there. And I used our gingham jewel tones paper for the border, and I cut it out using a little square from our basic shape dies, basic mini shape dies that are exclusive to our store. And up next is our Harvest Mice stamp set. This little guy is so cute, and it goes really well. You can mix and match it with the 2 plain mice from our Merry Mice that came out last Christmas. None of the mice are identical to that set, so they're all different. I would say the two little mice are actually closer to maybe the Caroline mouse and the Merry Mice. And then up first, I have a card using with the little sweaters and the mouse pumpkins from the set, and a sentiment as well. And here I have a mouse being pulled in a wagon using corn stalks from our Barnyard Buddies, and also the corn from the set. And there's a little movable handle there that you can put in any position. It comes as a separate piece that you can move back and forth, as well as our little borders here from our Slimline basic borders, and the pattern paper from our Sleek Stripe. Here's a card using the pumpkins that we've paired with the Happy Harvest sunflowers. I inked up the background with Distress ink and used a fancy frame rectangles die on a dark piece of craft paper, and then I heat embossed my sentiment using a punny sentiment from the set. Next up is a Slimline card featuring a polka dot pattern from our background basic stamps, and I stitched, used one of the stitch mats from our Slimline Scallop frame dies. I stitched the Fluffy Cloud dies in my background, and then used the Hillside die from our Slimline Nature border dies. And for my sentiment, I stamped it onto a classic Sunburst paper, which was cut with a tag using our new window quad square dies. Up next is our little Buckaroo set. It comes with a cowboy and a cowgirl, a little howdy sentiment, a sheriff star, and a horseshoe. I added stitching to my panel using the Slimline basic border dies, as well as a little red Rick trim with the same dies. And then I added my yellow gingham background using background basic stamps, and then the barn and the fence from Barnyard Buddies. And then I added the little cow print to the chaps and the vest with some Copics, and added a custom sentiment from our Kinsley alphabet stamps. Up next is a wanted style birthday party invitation that I used some free Western style fonts, and then I just made sure to leave enough space between my little sentiment to allow for my cowgirl and cowboy. I used our wood grain embossing folder with a distress crayon to create that real rugged look. And for this card, I used our Fancy Frames quatrefoil dies for that outer stitched edge, and then I masked off my sky so that I could have the green ground and the ink two different colors. And then I used our Barnyard Buddies fence, cutting between the dies there so that they could sandwich real close together. And then I used a Copic marker so that my border around the fence would blend with the background. And I used the horse and hay bale from Barnyard Buddies, and stippled some dirt on the ground with a Copic to give the look of a rodeo, and added that jute bow between the fence and the ground just to give it that finished look. Up next is our Farm Fresh stamps. These are a complement to our previously released Barnyard Buddies, as well as a couple other mini sets. It comes with a windmill and a barn, and a tree and a fence border, as you'll see here. It's great for making quick scenes, and it also comes with a new goat and a little duck and 2 crows and a rooster and 2 chickens, as well as eggs and a scarecrow for fall. Here's that scarecrow. For this card, I created my window using our stitch semicircle dies, and cut a tree from our Happy Harvest in half to put on either side of that window. And I used pumpkins and corn stalks from our Harvest Mice, and as well as the corn stalks and hay from Barnyard Buddies. And there's that. And I created my sunset with mustard seed and warm lipstick, and then used a sentiment from Fall Kiddos. Up next is a really simple Scarecrow card that I made for my brick and mortar stores that carry our products. I cut a 4-inch circle and cut it in half using 1/2 for the sky and 1/2 for the ground. It just made a really quick, simple, cute card. For this card, I created a Slimline Card combining Farm Fresh with Barnyard Buddies and all of our other little critters from the sets. I framed my scene with a Slimline Scallop frame and classic gingham paper, and then created a custom sentiment using our Kinsley alphabet stamps. Up next is our retro ornament stamps. This comes with 5 unique layered ornaments and 3 different bows, and this fun retro Merry Christmas greeting with 2 different options for hanging your ornaments. My first card recreated the look of a Christmas tree using the branch from our holiday style stamps, which I stamped repeatedly, and then I added that stitched edge using our Slimline basic border dies, as well as created a handmade red and green striped pattern paper using our background basic sets just by offsetting them. I add a little Stickles glitter glue to the tree to add a little tiny bit of sparkle when you move the card. And then for my sentiment, I use the Inside Greetings Holiday stamps, our new one that can be used on the inside of the card or the outside. Up next is a card where I used the little sprigs from our classy Christmas set. My bow got twisted there. I used inks from Concord and Ninth and Pink Fresh Studio for my ornaments, and they just blend together beautifully. And then I used the beaded chain image in the set to hang the ornaments, and a label from Sliding Windows stamped onto some paper from our classic Sunburst, and stamped with a sentiment from our new Inside Greetings holiday set. Up next is a card I mass produced for my retail store to display. It includes our Slimline Scallop frame dies that I bled off the edge, and more of those tree twigs from Classy Christmas, as well as some bright happy ornaments. And I stamped my sentiment on the inside using the Inside Greetings stamp, Christmas stamps, onto a piece of our subtle gray tones paper that I had stitched the edges with the die. Up next is that same striped ornament in a rainbow of colors. I stamped the perimeter with my tree sprig from Classy Christmas to give the look of garland, or like the center of a wreath. I used that nice big sentiment from our Season's Greeting stamps and the coordinating dies, and I added some sequins for some twinkly light look. And here's one of my favorites. I started by stamping the Classy Christmas branches and then heat embossing them, and then I ran it through my die cutting machine with our new frilly frame quatrefoil dies, and then I added this scalloped edge using the Slimline basic border dies. And you can see I kind of sandwiched it in between the 2 layers there for a hidden seamless look. And then I used the Pink Fresh Studio Blue inks for my ornaments, and added some Stickles glitter glue for the shine. And these dies come with a little hole so you can string your ribbon easily. And then I used our Inside Greetings Christmas stamps for my sentiment there. Up next is our Classy Christmas. It's a 4x6 set that comes with 3 poinsettias, 2 different pine cones, and 2 little berry groupings with 2 leaves for the poinsettias, and 3 holly leaves, the little Noel sentiment there, and 2 of these tree branches, which are now my favorite. You'll see I just used them on a bunch of the previous cards, and I'll be using them on a bunch of the new ones coming up. So here's just a comparison of how they stand up next to our previous holiday style and our Christmas trimmings, just so you can get a feel for what the size is. They all work together beautifully, and those both go both directions, so you have one each way. So here is our previously released Season's Greetings, where we have these 3 nice, beautiful, large greetings, and we previously had dies to match all the little small pieces, but not the sentiments themselves. But this year we've come out with dies to match the sentiments. We realized how much we missed them. They're just great for adding these sentiments onto textured backgrounds, like cards like this one, and as well as this one that also is on a textured background. It's just hard to stamp on that kind of surface, and yet it's really nice to have them. So there's those little sprigs that the previous dies cut out. So here's some examples using our Classy Christmas. Up first is a card that I stamped in dye ink, and then I went back with I kept it in my Misty, and I stamped over it a second time with our a Versamark ink with clear embossing powder, and then I watercolored my images with the Karen Brush Pro markers. And for my background, I used that frilly frame quatrefoil and then a sentiment from the stamp set. And then up next is a card using our frilly frame quatrefoil dies again in the background. This time, instead of a cutting plate, I used an embossing mat, so it gives it an embossed look. And I used our frilly frame retro petal dies to add that smaller stitch frame around the around those embossing. And for my images, I colored them with Copics this time instead of watercolors, and added glossy accents over the berries to give them that nice realistic shine. And for my sentiments, I used our holiday style stamps and dies. For this card, I used the same technique as the first one, where I started by stamping it in a dye ink and then went over it again with a clear Versamark ink that I used clear embossing powder, did it twice. So I can use watercolors with this dye ink and have a greater choice of colors. So for the centers, I used Studio Cadia's lipstick red clear transparent crystals. And for my border there, I used our frilly frames hexagons dies together with the outside edge. I used our new classic Sunburst paper in green. And then for my inside sentiment, I used our Season's Greetings from our Festive Greetings stamp set. So up next is our North Pole stamps and dies. This comes with 4 cute little elves, and 2 girls and 2 boys, and a Mrs. Claus and a new Santa Claus, and 2 different balloons, a solid and a outline. And then it comes with a naughty and nice list, and little strings for your balloons there, and then a little tiny, I squeezed in there a little tiny North Pole sign so you can put it in the far distance, and then a plate of cookies for Santa, a little present, and a bunch of little stars and some punny sentiments. This really complements our Santa Claus Lane from last year. So the Santas are similar but different. They're posed opposite directions, and this one has his arm up to wave or hold the naughty or nice list. Up first, I created a card with inking up my background with Tumbled Glass Distress ink, and then stamping our Frosty Flurry stamps in the background. And then for my little kids, I colored them with Copic markers, alternating the red and green. And for my border there, I used our new Slimline Nature border dies for the slope, and then our Slimline Basic die border dies for the straight stitch. And then a little bit of our holiday cheer paper in a red gingham. And then 3 little red hearts from our basic mini shape dies that are an exclusive to our website. That's the #2 set. And this card here uses our snow flurries instead of our frosty flurries in the background. There's 2 different options we have for those. And then I used our winter scenes dies there with the cabins and the fir trees, and the little sled from, sorry, back to the winter scenes here. Here's an example of it. It's sized just a little bit wider than 5.5 inches wide. And there I used the sled, or the sleigh, and the bag of toys from our Santa Claus Lane, as well as the little presents, and the there's that little North Pole sign in the distance, and the punny sentiment from the new North Pole set. For this card, I heat embossed the little boy and girl in my background with their outstretched arms onto a piece of our new classic Sunburst paper. And to fill in some of those gaps, I used a white die cut heart and a little snowflake, and then added a scalloped frame from our fancy frames, and this little sentiment was stamped onto one of our banner basics. And then I popped up the little girl and boy elf in the center that I colored with Copics to draw attention to them on this busy background. For this card, I went nice and clean and simple using the border paper from and the background paper from our Holiday Cheer paper pack. And I stitched the edge with our new Slimline basic border dies and then added that delicate little scallop above and below them using that same die. And then I added some glossy accents to the little holly berries in the printed border. And then for the Santas and Mrs. Claus, I inked up some worn lipstick and added a sentiment from the set. For this card, I used our new Slimline scallop frames for my outside border, and I focused on the little balloons from the set and used some real metallic gold thread and heat embossed my stars there in the background. You'll want to do that though before you heat emboss because it will snap the thread. And for the background, I backed it with some white paper behind my scallop frame and then used some of our dots and stripes jewel tone paper pack and rounded my edges with a corner punch. For my sentiment, I cut apart the spreading Christmas cheer. There was also a larger Christmas cheer word, and I cut that apart so I could fit it into the space. So there's a smaller word Christmas that I substituted. For this card, I'm using our window quad square dies to create my little frame there behind my elves and Mrs. Claus and Santa. And I backed it with some paper from our holiday cheer, and I used that greetings from our new Slimline scallop frames and added a little word Christmas from our new North Pole set. Up next is our winter scenes, a fuller look at it. So in addition to that other border, we have a little igloo, a little snowy tree, an ice block, and a row of fir trees that can be used with this separate piece that can be there or taken away. So you can use it for ice rink or a pond, as I'll show you here in these examples. But there's also our penguins. There's 6 penguins in our new Penguin Pal set, and it comes with a bunch of punny sentiments, of course, and a new ice block that faces the opposite way so they can be used together or as a spinner or something. And then there's the 2 balloons, both solid and outlined, and a little fish and a hat and 2 candy canes and a string for your balloon, a letter to Santa, and a bell for them to ring. For my first card here, I created a square card with our window quad dies and then inked up my background with Salty Ocean and Blueprint Sketch and Chip Sapphire, and then sprinkled it with water and some white paint. And I used a Copic multi-liner pen for my balloon strings and colored all of my little embellishments red so that they would all be cohesive together. And it's just a super simple card, but it turned out to be one of my favorites. For this card, I used that border with the extra little piece that you can stamp there. And then I took some masking material with the dies that come with our winter scenes, and I masked off the trees so that I could ink up the bottom half with some Salty Ocean Distress ink. And then I added those little, stamped those little waves from our spring scenes dies and used those 2 ice blocks for them to be on. I heat embossed a punny sentiment and added my little fish. And then I impressed those stitched clouds using our fluffy cloud dies. So here is a take where you color the trees in a nice like blue color to give it a snowy look. And then I added some stickles over the top. I used our new sleek stripes along the bottom and our Slimline basic border dies for the scallop or the rickrack. And then our polar playmates, excuse me, not polar playmates, playful polar bears for the bears, and the snowflakes are our snowflake circle frames. For my sentiment, I used our Inside Greetings holiday stamps, and then I used our Frosty Flurries in the background there. For my next Penguin Pals card, I stamped the cute little solid heart balloons using the Pink Fresh Studios dye inks. I love how the dye inks are transparent to allow the other colors to peek through like a real balloon. And then for my strings, I used a multi-liner pen again. For my sky, I created a mask using the cloud border die from our Slimline Nature border dies, and then inked them up with some tumble glass distress ink. And then for my sentiment labels, I used the stitch circles from both our window quad circle dies and our staggered circle dies. And then that little rainbow strip was cut from our surprise paper pack, and then I used some clouds from our new spring shower stamps, or relatively new. And then this card uses also our window quad circle dies. You can see a comparison with our previous card that I used the square ones. So a couple different ways to use them, although there's so many more ways. And then I used a pattern paper from our Sleek Stripes and cut out some ruffled scallops there at the bottom using our new Slimline basic border dies. And then I colored the little hats and scarves to match the bright colors in the paper, and then added a little sprinkling of snowflakes from the set that I heat embossed with white embossing powder. My next card uses a couple of the scene building elements from our winter scene stamps with our Penguin Pals. I used the mini igloo together with the igloo from Polar Playmates, and then a Slimline Nature dies to create my stitched snowy hills there. And then those little tiny mini trees also from winter scenes, which I tucked in there in the background. And then for my background there with the little snowflakes, I used a variety of snowflakes from our new winter scenes. It comes with a bunch of them just tucked in little spots in the set, and I just put them all, arranged them on my clear block and created my own background. And then I used the different penguins in my foreground and inked up underneath them so they didn't look like they were floating there. Our next new stamp is called Holy Night. It's a nativity stamp set that I've wanted to make for years. It comes with the word, or 3 different sentiments there, and a little sheep, and a bunch of shining stars that are new to this set, and the wise men, and a camel, and a donkey, and Joseph and Mary, and 2 different little baby Jesuses to choose from, as well as the stable. And then we have 2 brand new inside greetings. They're called Inside Greeting Christmas and Inside Greeting Holiday. I created these out of a need to have something to stamp inside my own Christmas cards. My hand got so tired repeatedly writing the same sentiment last year, so I decided to create a brand new set that could do this for both faith-based and non-faith-based. They're both great sets though, with really sweet sentiments. So the up first is a card using that set with our nativity, and I used our new Slimline scallop frames there for the outside, and the shining star in the center, and then I cut another piece out of the black cardstock to layer over the top for my ground. Here's a vertical version using the new classic Sunburst paper, and I stamped my sentiment there near the center and heat embossed it. And then I used our Slimline basic borders, and I added some stitching there to my panel. I love for that lacy scallop to just put most of it behind and just have a little bit peeking out so it looks like it's sort of floating there. For this one, I used our Window Trio square dies and backed it with some of our gingham jewel tones, and then heat embossed my sentiment there in the little window. And then I added this little rickrack edge and stitching with our Slimline basic border dies and our Dapper diamond embossing folder there. There's something about diamonds that feel very majestic to me, or regal. And then for this card, also using our new Holy Night, I created a background with distress inks, and then I heat embossed it with the stars there, and then also with this Sharpie white paint pen that I put the little polka dots with. And then for my background there for the ground, I used the slope die from the new Slimline Nature Border dies and heat embossed my sentiment there. Next up, we have our Victorian Christmas stamps, which are a complement to our previously released Christmas home, and they give you an option for a third house when creating your neighborhood scenes. Previously, we only had two, and I always felt like I wanted a third one to kind of line up as a neighborhood there. So up first, I have a card that shows just the one house as a focal point with a snow globe that I created using our stitched semicircle stamps there and some of the little supporting images from our Christmas home. And I created my snow globe using the stitched semicircle dies and flipped them and cut them off at the base so that, and then used our amazing argyle there for the wood grain and our Slimline basic border dies to give it the stitching. And then I created my little snowy hill using our Slimline Nature border dies and a label with our stitched oval dies and a sentiment from Victorian Christmas. And the background there is our new classic Sunburst paper, of course. Up next is a card where I created that little neighborhood that I was wanting that I mentioned, and I used the little lampposts and snowmen from Christmas Home. And for the background trees there, I used our Here Comes Santa set. There's a small 2x3 stamp set, and I just stamped that border twice and added some stickles over the top to make it glitter. And then for the Merry Christmas sentiment, I used our Merry sentiments, and then From Our House to Yours is from our Christmas Home stamps. And here's a version where I only used the two stories, two of the Victorian Christmas and one from Christmas Home. And I wanted to sort of look like Alamo Square in San Francisco, so I used our cityscape border die there in the background and some of the trees from Christmas Home. It may not snow in San Francisco much, but this is how I imagined it would look at Christmas time. And here's a card I started years ago using our Christmas Chapel and Christmas Home stamps, supporting images there with our sunny semicircles before we had our stitched arches. And for the sentiment, I used our May the Miracle of Christmas Fill You with Joy from our Inside Greetings and some little snowflakes from our Sledding Christmas and a background from our classic Sunburst paper. Up next is a little 3x4 critter set called Sledding Critters. It is a complement to our previous cruising critters, as you can see under there. It comes with some sentiments that say dashing through the snow and sledding by with a holiday high, a couple little snowflakes there, and of course the critters in the sleigh. Just to hold it up to our previous critters, they're actually a kind of a new carload of critters, more winter themed. So for my first card, I wanted to create them sledding through Central Park. So I used, again, that cityscape border in the background to create my New York City. And then for my slopes, snow slopes, I used our Slimline Nature border dies. And for my little trees there, I used the Christmas Home again. And these dies come with a bonus word that says sledding and snow. I used that same paint pen in the background. And anyway, from the background, I used the coordinating sledding word dies that come with it and just cut off the word sledding for the stamps so that I could substitute the die that comes with it. Sorry if that doesn't make sense. So for this card, I paired it with our winter scenes background there. I colored it with the white trees like they're covered in snow, and then used that word snow from the dies. I layered several layers together to kind of give it the look of chipboard. And then I colored my images really bright and cheerful to make them really pop in the foreground. And up next is a little 2x3 set called Surfing Santa, perfect if you like to holiday in warm climates. It says warm winter or warm Christmas wishes with a little palm tree and a surfboard. For this first card, I stamped those little palm trees twice, once in green and once in brown using my Misty. And then I used these islands here from and the tree from Tropical Scenes and the little bigger tree from our Sending Sunshine set. And then I added these little waves also from tropical scenes just to give it the appearance of water rippling. And the little thin border from our sleek stripes. And I created the horizon there, inking up the background with tumbled glass distress ink for the sky and peacock feathers for the water, just taking turns flipping that masking material. And then for my sentiment there, I used heartfelt wishes, heat embossed onto black cardstock. I just love the way sentiments look with black and white there. And here's a version of him surfing on the waves, using the waves from our, and clouds from our new nature border dies, the Slimline Nature border dies. And I created 3 of them, taking inspiration from Candace Fisher, who used our ice cream truck that way. I thought it created a good sense of movement. And then I stamped the sentiment there in our staggered circle dies. And then I felt like it was sort of floating there. So I created this band with our classic Sunburst paper, which I stitched with those Slimline basic border dies again. I tell you, I really, really, really love those stitched dies, as you can tell. So for this card here, I used our little Hedgy Holidays. It's a new little set that we had last year as a Black Friday promotion, but it wasn't available for sale, and this year it is. So up first, I created my little hills using our woodland border dies so they could roll down the hills, adding some little wind marks from our super duper stamps, and put some glossy accents on the hearts from the set. And then for the borders there along the top and bottom, I used the stripe from our holiday cheer, and then the little classic gingham. Sorry, I don't think it was classic gingham. It's actually gingham pastels. And then I added some little snow pin to the little pom-pom and the fur around his Santa hat. So now we have some new standalone dies. So previously we had our older window trio square dies and our window trio circle dies to create a row of stitched circle square cutouts for your cards. But now we have our new window quad square dies, and you can cut out that grid that I showed you, but you also have all the pieces you need to create these little mini tags that are just a tiny version of our Build a Tag 2 dies. I had some requests for some little tags, and I just think these are so much fun. Aren't those so cute? For these ones, I cut them out of Holiday Cheer and Striped Silly and our classic gingham papers, and I just mixed and matched all those little toppers and scalloped edges, and I just had a lot of fun making them. So for this card, here's just some examples how I use those squares for different cards. I can't wait for you to see everything that the design team is coming up with them, because I'm sure they're even more creative than I am. We also have a circle version called Surprise Surprise Window Quad Circle Dies. They come with 2 small poinsettias. 2 have slightly larger poinsettias, and then the berries you can layer in the center of the 2. And then 2 of the circles have stitching on both sides of the cut line. So you can cut a grid from cardstock. You end up with 2 positive circles that with stitching and 2 without. So up first is a card using the positive stitch circles that I layered with the 2 sizes of poinsettias to create a dimensional flower. I used the small flower on top with the bigger one on the bottom, and then I added a larger one cut from green, which I offset and twisted to be visible there. And then I added the wineberry pearls to the center of each. And then I cut my sentiment using our Christmas garland frame dies, and I heat embossed the word Merry from our Merry mice stamps. And then I rounded the corners with a corner punch. And here's that example again of just using that negative space with those same dies as a frame. And when I made my poinsettia card, I had some leftovers from my first card, so I used them on the card, this card here with the little 2 freebie dies. Every release we have a free die that automatically comes with your orders, and this season is a little poinsettia die. So there you have it. And this leads me to our next new standalone die, which is our frilly frame quatrefoil. And it has a full A2 sized panel that's stitched around the outside. So here's just for a point of comparison, our previously released retro petal frames. This is the die, the full die. It comes with a die that is 4 inches by 5 1/4. Well, this one comes with a die that is 5.5 by 4.25. So you can mat them together or separately. So for this card, I cut the die out 4 times out of pink, red, and 2 different greens, and then again out of white. And I add adhesive to the entire card base and set to work just filling in all the holes like a puzzle. So for this card, that's the example of using it as an embossing, and just 4 different ways that I use the same folder there, or die. And then of course I use that stitch die around the perimeter of a lot of other cards that I don't have here, but I think you get the idea. And for our last 3 new standalone dies, we have some slimline dies for all your long and skinny cards. But as you'll see from my examples here, I love to use them for everything. Up first is our slimline scallop frame dies, which come with a 3.5 by 8.5 scallop frame, and then a 2 by 3/4 by 7 3/4 stitch mat, as well as 4 beautiful scripty style greetings that say thank you, hello, greetings, and congrats. And then we have our Slimline Nature border dies. That comes with a wave and 2 stitch slopes for 4 unique looks, and then a stitch cloud border die, a grassy hill, which we've actually never had before. And all of these are 9 inches long. And then we have our Slimline basic borders, which include 6 9-inch borders, a rickrack, 2 lacy scalloped edges, 1 solid scallop that can be layered underneath the others, and then a mini scalloped edge and a basic stitch line that only impresses the cardstock, but it doesn't cut. And I can tell you, as you've seen for all these card examples, that is like my new favorite die. So here's just some examples using all of the slimline scallop frames. Here's more in the traditional slimline card, and then there's just the mat. I use the inside mat with to give a bigger border around the outside edge and let that peek through. And for this one, I use those slimline scallop frames to bleed off the edge of an A2 size card there, so it just cut off the pieces, but it's just a perfect panel for your A2 size cards. As you'll see here, this is like one of my favorite style of cards actually. I just love having a little panel down the center. But for this one, I just scored it in half and created my little note card. So I can see doing these for like every holiday. I had so much fun doing it, and it was so quick. And then for this one, I just had the panel bleed off the one edge, not both edges. So there's just a lot of different ways they can be utilized. And here's just a little recap using our Slimline Nature border dies. So for here, I paired the clouds and the curved grass for it, and just because of the width of the dies, you can move them and create a different look depending on where you angle it on your smaller cards. And I did that same thing here with the clouds and this time the waves. So because of the narrowness of this card, you could get a lot of different looks from just one die. And same with these clouds here. I used just the one single die, and it looks like 3 separate borders there. And then I used it for the snow slope here, and it's long enough that I can center it in the center and get almost an even slope right curved in the middle. And then those slopes there. And then for our slimline basic borders here, I use those on almost everything. And this is where I get a little embarrassed, because you'll see as I'm showing them, I have a certain style of card that I just love using, and I just keep repeating that design, flipping it. So they're all variations of the same idea. You got me? So for this one, I used the stitching in the rickrack, and then again the stitching in the rickrack. I am a former jamboree lover for my girls' clothing, and they just had all those cute little trims and details, so that's pretty much what this all is. And there you have it. I'm going to fan out all these cards that I've made over the release. I ended up with, I think, around 50 cards that I made over the course of a couple months. Just look at all that crafty goodness there. And then some of the others. Can't see them all, but there's a lot of love and blood, sweat, and tears that went into that. And here's a fuller look at our release for fall, and then some of our Christmas sets here as well. Thank you so much for joining me and helping us reach this 5th birthday milestone. I love you guys. Bye-bye.